I'm going to ask these gentlemen questions for about 30 minutes, and then we'll do the book signing. So, to my left here is Joseph Menn. He's an investigative reporter, and he's the author of Cult of the Dead Cow. And next to him is Luke Benfey, also known as Death Veggie, one of the early members of CDC, and also known as the Minister of Propaganda. I think he came up with that himself. And then on the end here is Christien Rioux, who is co-founder of Veracode with myself. I should introduce myself too. And I'm Chris Wysopal, also co-founder here at Veracode. And when Joseph said he was writing this book, I was very excited to hear some CDC stories. And I didn't know he was going to talk so much about the Boston hacking scene and really kind of the origins of where Veracode came from. So I really appreciated that part. So let me start with you, Joseph. I'd like to know, and I think everyone wants to know, like, where did you come up with the idea to write about the Cult of the Dead Cow? I know you write about cybersecurity and technology and hackers, but why CDC?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I've been writing about this stuff for 20 years, and I mostly do investigative stuff, backdoors, cyber warfare, organized crime stuff. But it's a complicated subject that I think demands broader attention and really calls out for longer form treatment. But the last book I did was Fatal System Error, was basically about how we're all screwed. Like, the attack surface keeps growing, the geopolitics are borked, and the marketplace is failing in security by and large, and the legal structure isn't any good either. So that was like a dark book. And if I had to only write one cybersecurity book, it would probably have been that one. We got a really big problem, and we need to sort of go back to basics and figure this out as an urgent national priority. But I already wrote that, and so I wanted to do something else that was positive, to show, here's something that might work. Because even if we are still basically borked, we shouldn't give up. We have to keep fighting. We have to have a reason to go to work in the morning. And so once I decided to do something positive, then CDC actually came fairly naturally, because they go all the way back, 30, 35 years, and are still around and have accomplished the members of it have accomplished amazing things in all these different sectors. So you guys and others in the private sector, Mudge and others in government service, and Oxblood and fellows in sort of the activist nonprofit communities. Given how terrible the landscape is, the fact that this one group was able to do so many varied things that were positive is kind of mind-blowing. And plus, they're just great war stories.
Thanks. That's good to know. There's some hope here. Luke, Cult of Dead Cow predated the internet, and the idea that people would organize and exchange messages and text files pre-internet is probably pretty foreign to a lot of people today. How did that work? Can you talk a little bit about sort of the early days and how you guys were organized and what was going on pre-internet days?
Sure. I mean, to be clear, we didn't create the entire internet, just the popularization of it. But in the early days, it was all based around bulletin board systems, which somebody at their house would have a computer that would have a modem attached to it, and other people could call into their phone number, and it would effectively be a piece of software where usually, generally only one person would be on at a time, and they would post messages, and then somebody else would have to then call in and be able to read the message and respond to it, etc. So early on, CDC was basically based around a local network originally in Texas of friends or people who are sort of like-minded individuals, like weird kids who were the outcasts in the communities who found each other. And then they started writing text files and spreading those around locally, and then further and further amongst BBSs in other parts of the country and around the world, to the extent that at some point, they were like, okay, CDC itself always had a relatively small number of people, but even before the Ninja Strike Force came around in the 90s, originally there was something called the K-Cow Force, and to be a member of the K-Cow Force, all you had to do is run a BBS and have up-to-date files, like CDC files, and all the files were numbered, so you could see like, well, I've got 1 through 70, but I'm missing 72 and 73 or whatever, and so that was how sort of the information was spread, the files were spread, and also people found each other.
Cool. I want to ask Christien here. What made you want to join the CDC, and how does one go about, joining a group like this?
You get strong-armed into it now. I first ran across CDC when I lived in Maine, in the middle of nowhere. There was not a member board, but a board that happened to have some CDC text files that I would dial up to. I lived in the middle of nowhere, so it was the only board in my local calling area. But I managed to befriend the sis up there, and he was able to get me out dials to Bates College and the internet and other stuff, and that was sort of my introduction to CDC. I didn't really know anyone in the group, but that's where the name is CDC. That's where I first recognized Cultured by Cow. It wasn't until I went to college, I went to MIT in Cambridge, always sort of moving warmer. I live in California now, but I moved from Maine to Boston to Cambridge, and I had run across the Loft.com homepage as well back in 1994 when I first got online, and there were kind of links to CDC there as well. So I decided I really had to meet all these people at some point, because a lot of them seemed to be based in the Boston area, and I just started to hack Microsoft Windows. Windows 95 had come out, that had gone on the internet. I was very interested in producing exploit material and pulling down Microsoft's pants and things at the time. So I was doing a lot of that for fun just by myself, and I absolutely wanted to meet people that had that same kind of bent, those same interests. So I ended up going to a 2600 meeting at the Prudential Food Court when they were meeting there in 1996, and I met this guy and Mudge and Brian Oblivion and some other folks, and ended up meeting some of the New Hack City people, and it just kind of went from there. It ended up being just the people that I hung out with happened to be CDC people. I wasn't specifically looking for CDC; they just were my scene. I would go to parties and it would be those people. And then eventually I got into once I started writing Loft Crack and other things for Loft, it became clear that more could be done with CDC and writing software and promoting security awareness and whatnot through the kinds of things that I wanted to write. So naturally they reached out to me and said, hey, this BO thing we're doing, there might be more things we could do with that idea. So that's kind of how my trajectory into the cow at that point. So
very cool. I think we have 2 mics now. This is going to be more efficient.
Multiplying. That means I can talk over you.
Now I can interject. So I have a question for Joe. I think one of the more interesting revelations that came out of your research for the book was that Beto O'Rourke, who was running for Senate at the time, right, was a CDC member. What else was sort of a surprising revelation that you discovered when you're doing your research?
Well, yeah, just discovering that a member of the most influential hacking group in U.S. history was running for president was pretty high up there in terms of surprises. Possibly topping that, though, was that he was willing to talk about it, that he was willing to be outed and explain why. I think he was very honest with me. I think you can tell from the book. I mean, he wanted to be like the cool kids. He felt like a misfit, for the same reasons that you guys, got online. That this technology was really interesting, and that he was willing to put up with a lot of aggravation to find like-minded people. And he went on to say that the outsider perspective is super useful, and as a society, you benefit from bringing those people back into the fold, and that just because you're wayward at one point or another, or you don't want to play, in a big company or something like that, you can still, be of tremendous value to society. So that was a surprise. His candor. I also like the fact that the stuff that he was talking about as a kid, or when he was in CDC in the sort of formative years of the group, pretty much matched what he's done as a politician. I mean, he's been in favor of legalizing marijuana. I mean, normally when a politician's past gets exposed, it's the total opposite, right, of what he's like. He gets so some horrible current crime that makes him a total hypocrite. There's nothing that makes him a hypocrite. It's like the same guy he was then. I think that's kind of stunning with the way today's politics have gotten, that anybody's actually honest. What else? I really appreciate the fact that so many CDC members were willing to let me use their real names. And I think that's partially because the stigma against hacking has fallen some. I would like to fall further, which is one of the reasons I wrote the book. But that was really cool, that everybody was so candid.
That's cool. Luke, Joe writes a lot about how CDC sort of had this moral code and used the powers of hacking for good and not evil. And we all know there's hacker groups out there that, do bad things and they flame out and they blow up and, maybe someone goes to jail or just the heat comes down. And, that's almost like the common story, right? What gave CDC, where did this moral and ethical code come from that kept you guys from doing bad things and using your powers for good? Where do you think that came from?
I think part of it was that CDC, when it originally started out, although we were very much involved with sort of the computer underground, it was made up of people who, although they may have been very, technological hackers, phone freaks, and other things they were doing, there was also other, kind of weirdos. So artists and musicians and skate punks and all kinds of stuff. And so you basically had all of these sort of, as opposed to this sort of like technological purity, you also had these other sort of, in some ways, anti-authoritarian, anti-establishment elements, and so basically, I think some of it came out of that. We had also these sort of some people that were involved with it that were older. For instance, Night Stalker, who had been involved with the Yippies and TAP in the late 70s, early 80s, and so we had these sort of an older generation of people who a couple people who were able to sort of guide us. And then when Oxblood Ruffin joined, he brought on this whole sort of focus on human rights and things like that. And I think even before that, there was this embrace of the hacker ethic, do no evil kind of thing, but also being very aware that just because something is illegal does not mean that it's wrong, and just because something is legal does not mean it's right. So I think that there was this sort of like ethics over law kind of ethos right from the beginning. But at some point, we sort of decided, hey, we've all got these skills. We're made up of all these sort of smart people. Some of them are very skilled in programmers. Some are phone freaks. Some are artists. Some are have experience in sort of political manipulation, etc. Some can write really, really well. Some are show people. How can we sort of use this for good? How can we try to make the world a better place through these, being these, skilled weirdos that we are?
So, I guess I have a question for Christien next. Through your work at the Loft and CDC, Loft with releasing advisories about vulnerabilities, some not using coordinate closure because that didn't really exist at the time. Creating tools like Back Orifice, which are demonstrating holes like, big companies, the government, there was people that didn't like that. But I think today, we see that, in hindsight, like that pushed things forward, right? And now we have coordinated disclosure. Now people write tools to demonstrate weaknesses in systems. What was it like back then when you're trying to make these decisions about, is this the right thing to do? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Back when I started hacking Windows, first off, the lay of the land here is this 1995, 96. Windows 95 had just come out. Hacking Windows from a social standpoint, like in the hacker community, was considered possibly the lamest thing you could do. Nothing important ran Windows. It wasn't like hacking Solaris or HBox or any of these more important Cisco routers, whatever. If you hacked those things, you were cool. You hacked Windows, you were a total lamer, right? So I figured it was fallow field. Just because the only people using Windows were AOL users or whatever, didn't mean that there wasn't something of value to expose there. So I wrote some of the first buffer overflow exploits for Internet Explorer, and I was like, wow, this actually I can one click and I can totally own somebody's browser. That's pretty cool. The question is, where do you go with that? What do you do with it? There was no coordinated disclosure, as you mentioned. There wasn't even the concept of full disclosure versus responsible disclosure. None of that existed. So there was a mailing list called Bug Track, and that was it.
It was just disclosure.
It was just disclosure. You went to Bug Track, you posted some stuff there. I figured because I was in school at MIT that I might want to do this under a handle. So I picked a handle out of nowhere. I just picked the name of the Dogbert character from the Dilbert comic strip before they syndicated it, which was Dildog, right? And I figured I would release this stuff under a pseudonym, and that for the most part nobody would care, but maybe I could get some attention. Getting the attention resulted in Microsoft reaching out to me and being like, you really need to come to us first when you have stuff like this. So I was like, okay, we'll see about that. So the next time that I came up with my second exploit, I did contact them, and they said, you better not release this to the public or there will be consequences. And I'm like, oh, I don't know about that. So I took that email and I sent that to InfoWorld Magazine and CNN and a few other places just to see if I could get people to weigh in on what Microsoft was saying about this. So leveraging the media helped move the needle a little bit. I was concerned that Microsoft would never fix these issues, or they would do it in a once-a-year service pack kind of thing, which is basically the cadence for security patches at that point. There was no Patch Tuesday. There was no rolling updates. A Windows update didn't exist. So to make those things happen, you had to hold the vendor feet to the fire a bit. So yeah, I got kind of very interested in pushing things using the media as an opportunity to shame vendors that didn't make a good faith effort on behalf of their customers. So yeah, I mean that's really what life was like back then. I really couldn't. There was no better place to do things. We hadn't had the public discussion about vulnerability research yet. Loft advisories were basically, free form. We tried not to publish exploits that were immediately and inherently dangerous, but were proof of concept enough that people would have to take you seriously. And that was about the level of discretion that anyone expected at that point. They were getting free vulnerability research and they had no program for it. And I've got some salty emails from David LeBlanc over at Microsoft that I don't know if you'd even get to today.
I think one of the more interesting demonstrations you did was the foof bug.
Oh yeah.
Right? So can you tell us a little bit about how that worked?
The Pentium one?
Yeah, you use that to...
Yeah, you can, there were all kinds of interesting, sort of one-liner type vulnerabilities out there. You can crash things. One of my favorites was the PAM slam vulnerability in Linux, quadruple backflip through LPD. I mean, I had a series of sort of notable, vulnerabilities. The one that attracted some of the CDC attention was CDC 251 or 351, 351, which was a vulnerability in NetMeeting that I had published, and I did a pretty serious teardown of how the vulnerability worked and how to write an exploit for it. It was called The Tao of Windows Buffer Overflow, and it was sort of like, it ended up being like cited in academic works and things. It's sort of like one of the sort of seminal how to write buffer overflow exploits for Windows. And for me, that was like documenting that was probably one of the best moves that I had done in terms of like helping people understand how these vulnerabilities are actually real, and doing that knowledge transfer that was really important at that time. Before people really knew how to do all this stuff or how it worked. So yeah, it was fun.
Okay, over to Joe. You opened up here talking about, the idea of the book was, you want to talk about something positive after talking about all the problems we have, and, you write about all the problems we have, and, we have new problems today, right? What's going on with disinformation, and, it's a challenging problem. The influence that bad actors can have using the ecosystem tools that are out there, like social media and things like that. Do you think there's any lessons from how CDC went about, challenging systems and trying to point out their problems? Like, can we apply? How can we apply those today?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that one of the great benefits we have now is that other sorts of crises like wars or agricultural disasters, whatever, you look back and say, well, what did the heroes of old do in this situation? And we are incredibly lucky that the heroes of old in the cyber age are still right here, and we can ask them, and that's what I did. The CDC was incredibly impressive because they thought critically about stuff, and they were willing to keep leveling up way out of their depth. So, you had a mix of people, many of whom were really good engineers, but they don't know anything about the media. I mean, Kevin, took some marketing courses in college, right? It's Grandmaster Rat, the founder. But to mess with the national media on the scale that they wound up doing in order to tweak Microsoft into like finally having to answer difficult questions, that was really impressive. That was like green field. Like, okay, we'll learn how to do that. Same thing with Congress, with Loft. You guys going to Congress. I don't think you came out of the womb knowing how to talk to Washington, but they're like, well, this is really important. They have to know how bad this is and why the trajectories are all terrible. So we'll learn how to talk to Congress. That sort of thinking, the critical thinking and the willingness to engage in new terrain is what's so valuable now. So I don't think it's a coincidence that Alex Stamos, who was the guy at Facebook that blew the whistle on Russian disinformation, happened to have worked at AtStake with you guys, with the Loft wing of CDC. I don't think it's a coincidence that Katie Masuris came out of AtStake and brought bug bounties to places like Microsoft and the Pentagon, which would not normally be welcoming. So it's a willingness to engage in new areas. Stamos was going outside of his lane to do the disinformation stuff. His job was trying to protect Facebook itself and users from criminals and hackers. They weren't looking for this stuff, but once he saw it, he's like, "Oh, we really have to do something about this," and he forced the issue. So that's kind of the lasting legacy to me of CDC. Disinformation is a huge problem, and to me, like one of the legacies right now I see is the rank and file stuff in Silicon Valley, where you have people not just at Google, where people are used to shooting off their mouths, but at Amazon and Microsoft and Facebook and these other groups saying, we have enormous problems with AI, all this other stuff. I think that's super impressive, and it's going to be really, really interesting.
So we're just up at 5:30 here, and we're going to start signing books. Maybe one last question to Luke. I'll give you the last. He's got the mic. What are you most proud of, the legacy of CDC? There's a lot of cool things in the book. I know you guys have done some awesome stuff. What's that proud thing?
Man, that's a tough question. I don't know. I think probably what I'm most proud of is sort of influencing a generation of people who can come up and hopefully trying to let them know that they should be using their smarts and their skills to make the world a better place. And it's not all just about money. Money's great, don't get me wrong, but that's not the be all and end all, and it shouldn't be, it shouldn't be everything. And so hopefully, watching us and seeing what we did, people came away from that, and it seems like they did. Talking to people that Joe talked to, we've seen in the book, people that were influenced the script.
That's excellent, and I totally agree. That's awesome.
He meant to say BO2K.
He meant to say VO2.
Sorry.
So thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. This has been awesome, and thank you all for coming. Okay, so I guess we're going to form a line and we can get book signed. Okay.